Welcome to an exciting episode of Pete for Society. I have a very special guest today. He's a journalist, novelist, a writing coach and a former senior copy editor for the one, the only Situation with Wolf Blitzer. He's also an author of 6 mystery suspense thriller novels in the Larwick Chadwick series. Please welcome in the one, the only John DeDakis. Did I say that right, John?
No, but that's okay. It's DeDakis.
John's like, listen, man, learn how to say my name, please. But anyways, John, thank you so much for being here, man.
Thanks, Pete.
Like your resume alone is amazing. Go from the Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer, and then you also writing all these books. Like, tell us a little more about yourself that we may not know.
Well, I'm old. That's why I'm able to do all those things. It takes time to write 6 books and have a long career in journalism. I started out wanting to go into law and politics. My dad was a lawyer, ended up going into journalism, did that for 45 years, covered the White House when Reagan was president, and then ended my career 25 years at CNN. The last 7 as one of Wolf Blitzer's editors. And then wrote novels along the way.
Yeah, that's so cool though. So you got into journalism. It wasn't something you planned. Was it something like you kind of stumbled into?
I did, because I really was going to go into law, was going to go into politics. And for the good of the country, I decided to get out of, not go into politics and go into journalism instead. And I think the reason was the Vietnam War was a big deal back in the day when I was just beginning my career. And I was troubled by both the overheated rhetoric from both the left and the right. And I just felt that whoever was trying to spin me was leaving out salient details that would undermine their argument. And so I figured that journalism would be the good perch to sit on to try to figure out what the truth was.
Yeah, plus you're getting in with the Vietnam War. If you think about it, like a lot of the things that were being sent back over, it felt like a numbers game if you think about it. Because there's a book I read, I don't remember the author exactly, but it was like Voices of Vietnam was the thing. It was a collection of letters from people that were writing back from that were over there. And the collective of it is that these people that were over there, they're talking about, they're pumping up the numbers to make it sound like they're doing so much, but then you're hearing the firsthand experiences. So like with your career though, did you do a lot of traveling though? I mean, You're traveling right now. I know that much.
Well, I am. I mean, this is primarily a trip to visit my son in Oregon for Thanksgiving. And so my wife and I decided to do sort of a cross-country road trip. So this isn't really journalism. I'm retired from CNN in 2013. And you mentioned the numbers game. I mean, that really was a problem. In fact, administrations, both Republican and Democrat, were literally lying to the American people about our prospects for winning in Vietnam. And they were painting these rosy scenarios of pieces within grasp. And they knew it was a lie, but they had to save face. And that's why the anti-war movement had so much propulsion behind it, because people were beginning to realize that they were being lied to. So journalism just was a good place for me to be at an important time in the life of the country. I did do some traveling, not as much I think as I would have liked to, but at the same time, my career in journalism began right at the time I got married. And I knew from what I'd heard is that, getting shot out of a cannon to cover stories all hither and yon is a great way to end the marriage. And so I kind of made a deal with myself, to try to make the marriage first and the career second. I didn't always succeed at that, but I think that, because of the choices I made, that I think led to a lot more not only career stability, but family stability. I was able to be there, when all 3 kids were born, and, my wife and I are still together after more than 47 years.
Yeah, that's awesome though. I mean, congratulations. A lot of people can't even say that these days, with
It's true.
Everything you've been through and all that stuff, journalism. It had to be tough though for you to hear some of these stories though, at such a young age, with Vietnam, and then as we move on to the other wars that came up afterwards, there was just tons of different things going on. So how did you how was your mental health state at that point? You had to be seeing things a lot of people don't get censored to nowadays, what I'm saying? Now they censor things a lot more than you used to. Before, we always thought that shell shock was only for military people, things like that, the aspect of mental health has changed in general. But, for guys like you that are in the journalism area, the stories you hear and the things you see, it had to be kind of hard at times, didn't it?
It was. I mean, just making my career decisions was vexing because I was, 19, 20 years old. I really didn't
Yeah.
know a lot about the bigger picture. And so just
Mhm.
finding out, deciding what I was going to do with my life was very fraught, especially because of the draft and facing the prospect of going overseas and fighting in a war you didn't believe in.
Yeah.
At a young age like that. And then journalism itself. A lot of the times you're meeting people on the worst day of their life. You're seeing stuff that a lot of people don't see.
Mhm.
And so I was fortunate, I think, that I had a family, a mom and a dad who loved each other, loved me. And so there was a certain amount of, I think, emotional stability in the home that didn't exist in the homes of a lot of people I know. And the older I get and the more people I talk to, the more I realize just how much dysfunction there is out there. I mean, no family's perfect, and our family certainly had its own problems. I think that I was fortunate to be able to some way navigate a lot of the difficulties and moral questions that a person has to face.
Yeah, definitely, and then you had the supportive wife too. She's been with you for all this time and the things that you probably told her that you've seen, hats off to her, man. She's a trooper, man. She's had to go through a lot with you, especially all the things that you were going through, all the things you were seeing that most people weren't seeing too, like it's hard though, but we didn't understand the effects of a lot of this stuff that we were showing these people nowadays, versus now what you see in social media. It's like people like just starting shocked. It's like, but it's like, this is what y'all want. Like, the Charlie Kirk thing, okay? So remember how they started showing photos of what happened right after it happened? And then it's like, why are you doing that? Do you realize that somebody's kid is going to see that and they're going to be forever traumatized because they're not going to know what they're looking at? They're looking at a guy unfortunately passed away and got shot in the neck. It's like, but then you're putting it out there for people to see without realizing, somebody's kid's going to see that. And then you're going to scar that kid and cause all these problems?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, journalism has evolved tremendously in the 50 years that I was involved in it. And you have not just reputable news organizations with editorial oversight, that
Hmm.
are sensitive to, people's concerns about that kind of vivid and graphic detail. Now anyone with a cell phone has the power to publish, and there's no editor on your shoulder asking, where'd you get that? How do you know it's true? Is that something we
Yeah.
should really show? And so, it's the Wild West out there in a lot of ways.
Well, because everybody says everything is fake news too. Like, a lot of times they refer to CNN, oh, that's all fake news, but they don't. You know what I mean? Like you hear that all the time, but it's like, how do you know it's fake? You know what I mean? Like it's no one checks any sources of credibility anymore. Like you were saying, there's nobody there to check and be like, hey, how do you know that's real? Before you put
Well,
that out there, there's nobody that.
I would push back against that.
Okay.
There are people who do fact check. There are reputable
Oh,
news
okay.
organizations, Reuters and AP, just to give you two examples. Both are wire
Okay.
services. Reuters is based in the UK, but they are able to be accessed over here. Associated Press has been around for 200 years. And,
Yeah. Yeah.
they
Definitely.
have very high editorial standards, and it's not easy for things to get published because there are certain editorial standards that have to be met. The New
Hmm.
York Times, the Washington Post, NPR, BBC, The Guardian, there are plenty of reputable news sources out there. So I think, though, that there's a certain degree of fatigue over
Yeah.
how controversial news is. I mean, Donald Trump is the person who coined the term, fake news. And
Yeah.
I don't mean to be partisan here, but I don't think you have to, stretch your imagination to know that just about every time he opens his mouth, it's a lie. It's a demonstrable lie. So, but what he's doing is he's undermining trust, not just in the news media, but in the intelligence community, the judiciary, science. And remember when he ran for president the first time, he said,
Hmm.
only I can fix it. That's what dictators say. That's what authoritarians
Yeah.
say. You can't trust anyone but me. And so I would push back against the standard that we can't trust, any information that's out there. We can. We just need to be discerning.
No, I CNN was my go-to place for anything. I loved it. I had it on all the time, and Wolf was always a highlight for me though. And when you reached out and you said that you worked with Wolf Blitzer, I was like, dude, heck yeah, because Wolf Blitzer was one of my favorite people to listen to. I just liked Wolf's approach to things. He'd come in and just give you all those factoids and things like that. And then Anderson Cooper was another one that I really loved watching all the time, just because he had a personality. Him and Don Lemon. Don Lemon also, I loved Don Lemon. He was so great though. I just loved the way he carried himself. But CNN was my go-to news source for everything. I'd like literally have it on all the time. And during COVID, you just kept seeing all the stuff that kept coming in, and I interviewed a woman that actually was on the desk when 9/11 had happened. And it's like you don't think about the things that these guys are going through. They're having to report these horrific things, and it's horrible. Like people want to like monster size them, but it's like they're just doing their job, reporting the information they've got, and you're attacking them, trying to claim that they're lying to you. But there's people that are fact checking them, like you're doing it for Wolf and everything else. You know what I'm saying? And then you worked for the White House, so that had to be interesting from the aspect of like what things you could say and you couldn't say, because the White House is very secretive about certain subjects. I'm sure you had to go through a lot of red tape for that, would you not?
Well, as a White House correspondent, your job is to find out what's really going on. The White
Oh,
House
okay.
press secretary's job is to make the president look perfect. And so there's by
Okay.
definition that it's an adversarial relationship. I wasn't working for the White House, I was covering the White House. So I was trying to
Okay, I
find
got
out
you.
what was
Okay.
really going on. But I want to circle back to Wolf. You're right. I mean, he's a journalist's journalist. He, as far as I know, doesn't vote because he wants to be, he doesn't want to even in a subtle way, you know,
Yeah.
put himself in one direction or the other. I worked with him 7 years. I don't know what his politics are because more than anything, he cares about accuracy.
Yeah.
And so I think that's an important thing to realize, and as far as 9/11 is concerned, I was in the CNN newsroom at the time, and they just happened to have had a crew, a camera crew in there. They were shooting promos for the network. And then 9/11
Yeah.
happens. And so they just began documenting how we were covering it. And there's one instant where Bob Fernand was the senior executive producer at the time. He was managing the coverage in the control room. And someone came up to him and said, "There's a rumor that such and such." And Fernand said to the guy, "We do not report rumors." So things, your point is well taken. People don't understand that behind the scenes, there is a lot of second guessing before you just run willy-nilly, with anything somebody says. You got to be careful.
Yeah, definitely, because it becomes a credibility thing, and then it's like people run with things, and people really easily influence these days, especially with social
Yeah.
media now, because now you don't
Yeah.
just have Fox News, CNN, all those other things you listed before, all the different papers. You have so many other people now adding their voice to everything. Do you feel like it's harder to get the real news out there because it's so muddled by so much fake stuff?
Well, I don't know if I mean, thankfully, I'm not involved in the day-to-day coverage anymore, so I
Yeah,
can't really speak with any authority about how hard it is to get the facts. But my hunch is that, the basic principles of journalism haven't changed.
yeah,
You're still responsible for getting as many sides as possible to respond. If you make a mistake, you admit it. You do your best not to have conflicts of interest, and so those kinds of news organizations are still out there. And so the facts are still findable. You just have to be able to go to the main sources as opposed to rely on hearsay on the internet.
yeah, true. So, John, let's change the topic here to why you're really here. The fact that you're using your writing to help people who struggle with grief. So, is this something you've always been passionate about, though? Like helping others like get through the process, because grief is a tough subject for people. Some people grieve in their own different kind of ways.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. It's certainly a complex subject, and
Hmm.
the short answer is no. I didn't start out to write to help people heal from grief. I did
Yeah.
start writing as I think sort of part of my subconscious was trying to process my grief. I mean, when I was 9 years old, I witnessed a car train collision that killed 3 people. And so when you're
Wow.
that young and you're facing your mortality at that age, because, one of the people who was killed was my age. So, you go, whoa, that's kind of heavy. And then my sister
Yeah.
took her life in 1980. And so the
Oh, okay.
very first chapter of my first novel deals with carbon monoxide poisoning. I was on the scene that day. And so you write what you know, you draw from personal experience. And so but I wasn't consciously trying to process my grief. I was just trying to
Yeah.
draw from it to tell an interesting story, and I also used that car train collision as something, laid the foundation for my first novel, Fast Track, which came out 20 years ago. And then fast forward, just about the time my third novel was coming out, my youngest son went missing and was found dead in my car a week later of an accidental heroin overdose. And so book
Wow.
4 in my series is, in a sense, takes the collateral damage surrounding the time when he was missing and was found dead. I used I guess you could say, the pain from that experience and poured it into the life of one of my characters. And I look back now 20 years later, and I can see that all 6 of the political thrillers that I've written, I've been processing my grief and doing so by putting it into the life of a fictional character and creating a story that is, for lack of a better word, entertaining. But it's also been
Yeah.
very therapeutic and cathartic.
So, John, I want to touch on a little bit about your sister taking her life. How old were you when she committed suicide?
She was 38 and how old was I? I was 30. I was 30.
Okay. So when you found out it happened, what was your first initial thought? Did you know she struggled at all? Did she
She
show any
had
signs of anything?
attempted suicide in the past.
Okay.
Then she seemed to have turned her life around and there was a certain degree of stability. But then a week,
Yeah.
within a month before she died, she seemed much more troubled, I guess you could say. Wasn't a total surprise. This
Yeah.
particular method was. To be honest, I'm not even sure she intended to kill herself, because she often would put herself in harm's way and then reach out and hope that someone would come and rescue her. But she'd never done anything with carbon monoxide before. And she
Yeah.
had the phone in her hand when she died, and she'd been reaching out to someone, but I think she just underestimated its potency. But the point is, she really was troubled. And I think it
Yeah.
was probably bipolar. I don't think in 1980 they had a word for that. And so they
Yeah.
had no medicine to treat it. And yet I think that was what was going on in her case. Yeah. I mean,
That
feel
yeah,
free to follow up.
I'm so sorry. First off, that's hard when you lose somebody like that. Especially, I don't. It did seem like she didn't intend to, you know. And then the thing is too, that a lot of people don't present things like that, or you don't see their trouble because they could be the happiest person in the world before they end up, you know. And the fact that we're even
Exactly.
having this conversation, John, is that we're against the grain of 80% of men that do commit suicide. We're talking about these things, you know, which is we're already beating the numbers already of guys that just won't talk about it. So let me ask you though this: why do you feel like men don't want to talk about it? In your own opinion, why do you feel like why we don't want to talk about it?
I'm glad you're asking that question because, I mean, in my experience, and I don't want to generalize, but in my
No,
experience,
definitely.
I think women are more emotionally resilient in the sense that,
Hmm.
they understand that it's okay to cry. That's an emotional safety valve. It lets off a lot of pressure that can otherwise build up and corrode. And I think, and again, I don't want to be generalize about it, but I think guys tend to bottle it up. It's seen as a form of weakness. And yet it doesn't necessarily, the pain doesn't go away, it
Yeah.
corrodes. And I would argue that, I mean, if you think about it, just about every mass shooter is a guy. And my hunch
Hmm.
is that
Hmm.
they've bottled up all this pain and anger and all of that to the point where the tears become bullets. And it doesn't necessarily mean that every guy is going to go out and become, a mass murderer. That's not my point. But that is an example of how corrosive and dangerous it is to bottle things up and not get them out there so that you can examine it. Because grief and pain are normal. It's part of life.
Yeah.
And yet it can feel so isolating. You can feel like you're the only one who feels this way, the only one who understands what you're going through. And yet, as soon as you start to have the courage to share it, you find that you're not alone. And it's interesting too that, guys pride themselves on being courageous. Well, if
Mhm.
you're so courageous, then suck it up and share this with someone else. What is it you're afraid of? You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. No, you're 100% correct because that's the same thing I say. I said, but I do it as like, what percentage of men committing suicide is it going to take for us men to start talking about these things openly? Like, what's going to be that number that gets you finally to say something? And from what I've had from previous guests, it's one guy is waiting for somebody to say something for everybody to start adding into the conversation, but
Yeah.
what person is it going to take, and like, to me, it's like, the whole alpha male thing is overplayed now, but if you're an alpha male, why can't you talk about your feelings? If you're supposed to be the superior top dog, the top of the food chain, why can't you be alpha all around type? You know what I'm saying? Like, because like, I did an interview with somebody. We did talk about negative self-talk, and like we were talking about the difference between female and males. Males had the tower system of the alpha male. Females had more like the social kind of like, but why can't we do the same thing too? And my thought is it's a generational thing a little bit. Because think about it, when my dad, to me, we didn't really have like a real close relationship, like emotionally. We didn't talk about things. Now that, I'm doing this, I could see that our conversations are a lot different, but I could see it from where my grandfather, they didn't have that same mentality. It was like, oh, you're a wuss if you talk about your feelings. You're a wuss if you cry. But these are all normal emotions people deal with, and it's like we're masking these emotions for no reason when we don't have to, and then these individuals that end up committing these heinous acts of like school shootings, like the Columbine. Okay. So the guys there were being picked on, like, and I'm sure they called out for help, but no one helped them, and it's funny though, because I interviewed somebody that was inside the library that was near one of the active shooters. And I didn't know that before we got into the conversation, the complete story, and she was telling us about it. And it was just like, wow, but it's like, you're not wrong. Think about the kid in Tennessee where the parents gave him the gun, regardless of the fact knowing that he had bad intentions. It's like, and then they thought, oh, well, I'm not going to get in trouble for this. You gave him the weapon to cause commit these acts. Like, you could have stopped it
Yeah.
before it happened. And
Right.
then when you go to social media, it's like some of these guys are posting these like really disturbing thoughts on social media. Then, and it's like people are seeing these warning signs, and then everybody wants to turn blinders on. But then it's like, oh, well, it's a mental health issue. But then it's like, okay, what are you going to do about it? And then it's like, well, and then it's like you get 20 other excuses. And then fast forward to where we're the Dallas Cowboys player, unfortunately, that just lost his life recently. His girlfriend was noted saying that he had a history of mental health issues. I'm like, okay, so my thought instantly is, what were you doing to help him if you knew he lost his mom a year prior? Was he struggling? Like I have so many other questions I'd like to ask her. Like, hey, listen, was he struggling? Did you know he was struggling? Like, he plays for a professional team. There's no way somebody didn't know that something was up with him at least, or noticed like he was acting different. I mean, and it's needless to say, it's that just because you have everything going on, you're playing for a professional team, doesn't mean you don't struggle with these things, And then what is it? The gentleman that was associated with Ellen DeGeneres' show, he had everything too. He had all money, had all this fame and everything, but he still took his life too. You know what I'm saying? To me, it's like mental health. It doesn't matter who you are. They don't have a selected choice, But why can't we? What are we doing to help these individuals? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's always the question
Well,
you want to ask.
I think you're doing something right with this podcast. I mean, I think that,
John, for you
it's
to say that, it means the world to me. It really does. It really does. It's
well, I mean,
amazing. I am trying though.
yeah, I mean, you're giving people an opportunity to express themselves.
Hmm.
I think that when other people tune in and they see, that it can be discussed, I think that, you're maybe not going to be able to solve, the problem on a
Yeah.
macro scale, but it's like one person, one by one. But you're making, I think, taking an important step toward, helping someone. And if you can help just one
Yeah.
person, it's
You're
important.
right. That's always my big thing from the beginning was this. I always tell everybody, always ask, like, when I invite them to come tell their story, say, like, well, how's that going to make a difference? I said, just think of it this way. If you touch one person's heart, you've done enough. That's it. Now, if you touch many more, okay, that's great. But as long as you get that one person that feels the same way you do, or they don't feel like they're alone, all these other kind of things like that too. And that's always been the mission since day one of doing this thing is, it's just making this conversation normal. Like, we could talk about cancer, all these other things, but why can't we talk about our mental health? Because, then you look at the flip side, I don't think a lot of people know a lot about it, but if you think about where we came from to where we're now, we have so much more information nowadays, and we better understand a lot more of these conditions that people are dealing with, that we could better help people understand so they don't automatically start calling people crazy, or it's like saying all these wild things to people that are just detrimental to them. Because like, like I have anxiety. So like if I go into an anxiety attack, someone telling me to calm down isn't working because you're not effective enough. But it's at the same time, we're not teaching these people effective things to do, and
Well,
things
have
like that
you
too. And
let
that's
let
my
me let
hope of this.
let me turn the question around. Have you in
Okay.
this, I'm going to ask you a personal question. You don't have to answer it,
Okay.
but
No, go ahead.
I appreciate the fact that you shared about anxiety attacks. Have you, been in a counseling situation, and has the counselor given you guidance and suggestions on how you can deal with your anxiety?
I've had yes, several sessions where I've had where they gave me different things and tips and things like that too. And while doing the show too, I've learned a lot of tips along the way as well. So that was the other beneficial of doing this is I get to meet different individuals that specialize in certain areas, and they're always giving me new techniques. Like breath work's a really great one. My recent guest before I've had you on, him and I were talking about it. He used the method like basically essentially like if you were to go to like a walk-in freezer, you take a deep breath and the cold air re-regulates, and things like that too. All things that I start using because I'm learning these things as I go. So, but yeah, that's where it started originally. When I started this thing, it was just, then I got interested in like, why are we not talking about this more? And I think the fact that I'm not professionally trained. I'm just an average person that's trying to make a difference, just let people know that just because, we all come from different walks of life. You have your background. I've had people like in the top 1% of their respective categories come on, and we all have had the same conversation. And the funny thing is that more people know my name than people, than a friend of mine that has like 100,000 followers on YouTube. So that goes to say is that regardless of how many followers you have, it's the message that people are hearing my name more often is what makes it feel good. And then every time I hit record, I love these conversations because it's interesting. Because I can meet individuals like yourself and other people, and it's like now I can go tell people like, hey, listen, who I was talking to the other day, and they just look at you like, I'm like, yeah, I was talking to them, and they're all like fascinated, about the people I talk to all the time. So it's really good. But I do notice though, like people approach me in a different light now. They're like, hey, listen, I know you handle these subjects. It's the first giveaway that they're going to ask me something mental health wise. And it's funny because a lot of people come to me and ask me questions on things. And if I don't have the answer, I have a whole Rolodex of people that I've interviewed. I could reach out to any one of these individuals that specialize in that area and say, hey, listen, I have a question. Do you think you can help me? If you can't help me, can you direct me to somebody who can? And I love it though. It's great. I love what I do. And it's a passion of mine. Like you can tell, like everybody I meet will tell you the same thing. Like, they just love the fact that I just conducted a conversation versus an actual interview, because I feel like some people are made for those kind of conversations. In other words, which is great. That's great that works for other people. But me, I just like having a conversation. I feel like you get more out of the conversation and things like that too. So, I mean, this topic is so fascinating because it's so broad, but regardless of where you come from, we all deal with these issues on a daily basis of some sort, or possibly you have a loved one that do too.
Right. Yeah, right. I mean, I feel the same way you do, that I consider it a good day if I've had a
Hmm.
conversation that goes in depth with someone. We are great at superficial conversations because we don't want to make anybody uncomfortable. We don't want to
Yeah.
force our opinions on other people. And yet, if given half a chance to go deeper with someone, I think that, just giving a person a chance to be heard, to get it out. Um, one thing I heard, I can't remember exactly where or when, it was, if somebody is really agitated about something, the best response is, do you need to be heard? Do you need a hug?
Yeah.
Or do you need to be helped? What do you need? And often they
I think
just need to
but
get it
John,
out there.
I think what you're doing is the right thing. You're doing the right approach to it. A lot of people don't realize in those situations, just asking that individual, just like you were doing, like you said, you're asking them, how can I help you? Versus just assuming just what to do from, oh my God, do this. No. Ask them. John has all great points right there. You know what he was doing? He was asking them, hey, do you need to be heard? He's doing the correct steps. I don't think enough people do. And I love that though. That was your approach, because there, right there, you're doing the best you can for a lot of people, because they will how best you can help them, instead of you just telling them what to do. Oh, you need to calm down, or you need,
Right.
it's like, no. John's going like, hey, listen, what can I do for you? And give them some options. And then they'll tell him, okay, none of those, this is what you could do for me. So I absolutely love that approach. You're doing it the right way, because you're asking them, hey, what can I do for you, versus you telling them what to do.
Well, thank you. I don't do it right all the time, especially in a marriage relationship. That's where you usually get it wrong.
Yeah.
I'm a
Yeah,
slow
no.
learner, but yeah, it's certainly is helpful to give the person some options, because we get so afraid of doing the wrong thing or saying the wrong
Yeah.
thing, or we project whatever worked for us onto someone else. And we're all different, and we need to
Yeah.
listen. We need to listen to each other a lot more than we do.
Right there. Do y'all, I want you to listen to what he just said. We all have to listen to each other because John's not wrong. That's the right approach to these conversations. Ask them how you can help them. So,
Thank
John,
you.
I did
I
want to.
should, and I should mention, I write in the voice of a 20-something young woman, and you'll notice I'm neither of those two. And the way I was able to do it was I was at CNN for 25 years. Many of the people I worked with were young women in their early
Oh,
to
okay.
mid 20s who would let me ask them questions about what it's like to be a woman. And they would tell me their stories about their boyfriends, their careers, their families. Learned so much. When you're listening, you're learning. And one of the
Yeah.
things I learned is that part of being what it means to be a woman is to play defense. I never have to be worried in a conversation, with someone, but women instinctively have to judge if this is a safe situation. I wouldn't have known that
Yeah.
if a woman hadn't told me that.
That's so cool though. I mean, because that's how I approach a lot of conversations too. I'm always asking questions. Like anybody I run into, like say for example, I ran into somebody the other day. He's had schizophrenia. He mentioned it for some reason. It just came out, and I said, "Hey, hold on a second. Can I ask you a question?" And I led with, "I run a mental health podcast, so what I'm about to ask you is more from the aspect I'm curious to know more about it, and I'm very interested. So can I ask you a question?" And he was like, "Yeah." And I think it's the way I approached it. It came off a lot better for me because I was explaining my angle. Is like, dude, I'm strictly interested in what I'm about to ask you, because what's with schizophrenia, a lot of people automatically assume they hallucinate. So I said, so can I ask you, do you hallucinate? And I said, the reason I'm asking you this is because a lot of these people kind of tell you that everybody hallucinates. And he said, yes. I said, can I ask you to what degree? And he's like, it was just like a little like shadowy image kind of thing, or like a ball he described it as, and it's interesting because every time I meet somebody with a different condition, my first question is always, well, okay, so how is it for you? Because everybody deals with them differently or have different symptoms and things like that too. So, you going and asking all these girls, it's essentially the same thing. You're asking all their different opinions because each one of them, I'm sure, gave you some different opinions and some had similarities, and we interviewed another author who's an Amazon bestseller now. She has, was it Fractures of Ailment, Daniel Blum. She did 100 interviews with people that have DID. And for anybody that's not familiar with DID, it's what they used to call multiple personality disorder. So Danielle went into this community of people and was interviewing 100 of them and asking them questions, and we asked her the same thing, like, what similarities did you see? And then the differences between them all, So like what you were doing essentially is the same thing though. I think it's great though. I think it's really great. I thought because I'm the same way too. I'm very curious when I ask a lot of people questions. I'm always trying to get to, and I explain them why I'm doing it. I'm like, listen, I'm just curious. I want to ask you some things. Whatever you feel like you don't want to talk about, you let me know. We veer away instantly.
I think
And
I think I think you're on the right track. I mean, often the way I start a question is, help me understand. And
yeah.
that's important for mental health and for politics. We're trying to win the argument as opposed to understand where the other person's coming from and why.
True. Very true. So John, let's talk about your son, unfortunately, that he's no longer here. So did he have a history of drug abuse at all, or was it just
Not really. I mean, I knew he'd been using
okay?
pot, but I'm not,
Yeah.
particularly alarmed about that.
Yeah.
He had an emergency room situation about a month before he died, and that was when I learned that he was using heroin. He was, he obviously he wasn't honest with me about how much he'd been using it, but he was, in the heart-to-heart conversation that we had, it was clear to me that he did want to get free of this, and
Yeah.
he revealed that he was depressed. And so I sensed that the real problem was the depression as opposed to the drug use. I think that when it comes to heroin, I think I misread that. I think I
Yeah.
really needed to take that more seriously than I did. But he was in the process of trying to turn it around. He had reached out to a psychologist, and the guy's schedule was filled, and they said, call back in 2 weeks, but he was dead a week later. The heroin is such, an insidious drug because,
Mm-hmm.
once you use it, you're hooked. And it's like every time you use it after that, you're trying to find that ultimate high. Stephen told me it was like, the best hug he ever had. And I know from, when he was missing, his friends were telling me a lot more about it. And he had said, he didn't start out mainlining. He was, snorting it. And he said, I'll never do needles, he told his friends. Well, it's so addictive that, yeah, it's the law
Yeah.
of diminishing returns. You need more and more and more. And
Mhm.
so it never got to the point where he was, stealing and becoming, breaking the law. It was, early in the process before it had really, become, such an insidious kind of thing where
Yeah.
he was going through rehab over and over again. We never got to that point because it ended
Yeah.
too quickly. And that's the thing with it. I mean, and the fourth novel is titled Bullet in the Chamber because at the time I felt that the cops, if they could bust the guy who sold him the drugs, that they should charge him with second-degree murder. Because in my opinion, that's the same as selling a pistol with one bullet in the chamber to someone you know is going to play Russian roulette and you don't care. But I
Yeah.
discovered in my research that it's difficult for the cops and the lawyers to make that case. I know that in some cases, law enforcement agencies are doing their best to make that kind of connection so that the pushers, get charged with second-degree murder as opposed to something that's lighter because it's a scourge. And then fentanyl
Yeah.
has come along, and that's even worse.
Yeah, definitely. No, I agree 100%. It's and even if you would have stopped at one, he probably would have got it somewhere else because depending on how bad his need for it was, like you said, it just that wanting to keep ramping up more, he would have found it some other way though, and we don't know what it could have been laced with, it, especially fentanyl being laced in a lot of other things too. That's the big concern as well. It's hard though, geez, you're watching them struggle. If you talk to a lot of people that deal with addiction and stuff, a lot of them tell you have to sit there and watch them self-destruct, which it's horrible because, your loved one is just deteriorating in front of you and you can't do anything to save them. And
That's
the
right.
fact that he went missing, like that's horrible too, because you're already freaking out already. Like, oh my God, what
Yeah.
happened to him? And then unfortunately you found him and then he had overdosed and things like that too. So I'm so sorry, man. But John, thank you so much for going into that with us. So man, I mean, like, I know it's
Sure.
hard to talk about, I'm sure, but does it get easier though, as you start telling his story a little more?
It is. I mean, I know it was very uncomfortable the first time I talked about it, and yet
Yeah.
there's something, maybe it's the journalist in me that is able to a certain extent, compartmentalize so that I'm
Yeah.
able to deal with, highly emotional subjects in a more or less dispassionate way. But what I've discovered is that, I mean, when you think about it, suicide and addiction are two of the more highly stigmatized topics. But
Mm-hmm.
I've discovered that
100%.
being able to talk about it, people have come forward often for the first time to be able to say, it's happened to my son, or I know someone who's, in this situation. We find that we're not alone. It's not as
Yeah.
isolating a feeling as it can feel.
I feel 100% with the
That's the
stigmatized
silver
part though,
lining.
John. I really do. I really agree with you in the part that's stigmatized. So I had a gentleman that came in where I work now. He's an older gentleman, probably around your age. He came in and was talking to me one day and he told me that his son had committed suicide using the gun that he had bought him,
Ugh.
because they would do like skeet shooting and things like that too, and he was like, he was like, I'm on the road, and he clearly can tell he'd been thinking about it for a while. And he just had to talk to somebody about it. And luckily he found me, and I was like, listen, this is what I do. I talk about these topics and stuff. And he's like, really? I'm like, yeah. So like I said, first off, do me a favor. Don't blame yourself for anything because you can't control what he was going to do. And he said, that's funny you say that because his note said, this is not your fault. And he said, what I can't understand is why he used the gun that I gave him. I said, I don't think there's really a symbolic reason why he used it. Maybe it was
He
just the
wasn't
thing he had
thinking.
right there.
I think with
Yeah.
suicide, there's so much tunnel vision.
Hmm.
You're not thinking about
Hmm.
who's going to find you, who's going to have to clean up the
Yeah.
mess. You're just so focused on how you feel that you forget that there's, a wider horizon out here. You're only thinking about
Yeah, I'm
that
a I'm
far
a
ahead.
suicide survivor too. I'm a suicide survivor too. I've attempted a few times. I thought about it, and you're right. It's tunnel vision. You're not thinking of the outcome of who's going to find you. You're just wanting to end whatever it is that is really bothering you. And it's hard when you like, I listen to these stories every day and things like that. And I know that was a big concern when I got into this. My therapist was like, she didn't want me to mimic any of these kind of things. But I'm like, at the same time, like I've learned over the year of doing this, like I've done 200 interviews in the first year. I've had a lot of interesting conversations. We even had a guy come on the show that talked about killing himself that morning. He was talking about, I had the gun in my hand, I'm on the edge of the bed. And, this was the first time we really had the topic come up. And it was rough because it's like you're listening to a man come to a mission that he's really at that point, and, I could feel where he's been, but afterwards he seemed so much better that he got it off his chest. And I think, like you said,
Wow.
it's a stigmatized conversation.
Well, and it means a lot to me to hear that you have been in that place and have gotten beyond it. And that, the perspective that you have now, you've got the credibility. It's not like
Yeah.
this is not some abstract theory or concept.
Right.
You've been there. And so, I
Right.
would imagine, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I would imagine that looking back on that year, you're amazed at where you are now versus where you were then.
Yeah, I am. I am. Like, if I was doing that actually, I've been self-reflecting and looking at things I've gone through in my past years, and it's what I've been doing this year. But just over this show alone, like the names of people I've had on the show, and the number of like the where they rank at, like 1%ers and it's crazy because, like, it's like if I would have told you where I was a year ago that I'd have all these interesting people come on and say yes to be on this show, I would have just laughed and be like, there's no way this is going to happen, because when you get into this thing, I think people want to get famous fast, but it's not about that. It's about, you just got to be consistent and you just got to keep going. You can't worry so much about the numbers right away, and things like that as well. But the fact that these people just said yes to me, it made me feel amazing. I got a lot of no's. Like, I'll tell you, I had a lot of no's. People said no, they weren't interested. But, you're going to get that when you get in this field. Some
Hey,
people are okay with it and some aren't.
let me ask you another
Yeah, go ahead.
question. Would you say that one of the reasons that you're in a better place now is that, your podcast isn't really focused on you, it's focused on other people, and that is the
Yeah.
pivotal moment that, when you get the focus off yourself and you're trying to be an encouragement to others, that really can make the difference?
It does, honestly, and it's funny you say that. One of my good friends, we had interviewed, okay? So afterwards, that was her exact question. So, well, Pete, we didn't talk about you. I said, this isn't about Pete. This is about the person I'm bringing in to highlight the things you're doing, like we talk about your accomplishments. Like now, when I go on other podcasts, I share my personal story more. That's just, the reason behind it, because everybody wonders, like, what made you start the podcast? And, then you start sharing a little more about yourself. But we're in this room, it's not about me. It's about the guests here. I'm highlighting what you guys are doing or your accomplishments, all these things, and all that kind of stuff. But my friend had a good question. She's like, well, who is Pete? So when I go and do these guest spots on other interviews, I talk more about me and what the concept of the show is and the mission of the show is. But when I invite people in this room, I have very strict rules. Like, this is a free space. You can speak however you like to. I'm very respectful, but I will ask you questions. I will dig in and ask things because I want people to better understand that if they're not haven't gone through these kind of things, I want them to know what your feeling is and that stuff, but I'm also very understanding of that. If you don't want to talk about it, we'll change subjects right away.
I think you've put your finger on something that's really important, and that is, and this is something I kind of discovered when I was going through grief counseling. My grief counselor would say, "Well, how do you feel?" Well, I feel like
Yeah.
shit, But what ended up
Right.
happening is that when you put into words what it is you feel and why you feel
Yeah.
that way, it helps to, I don't know, it's part of the deconstructing process. You
Mm,
deconstruct the issue and, in a sense, demystify it. And once you're able to examine it in a bit, when you're articulating it, it's sort of out there, and then you can look at it more
yeah.
objectively. Because when we don't articulate that jumble of feelings we've got, we're almost being controlled by the feelings because they're so powerful. But by
Yeah.
articulating them, that kind of diffuses things a little bit, and it helps us find meaning and understanding that helps us understand the feelings and try to make
Yeah.
sense out of what things are going on so that we can move forward with our lives. So I think there's a lot to be said for articulating the turmoil and then trying to
Right.
understand it and trying to move forward through it.
Definitely, definitely. John, we're at the fun part of the episode where before we start wrapping up, I'm going to ask you two questions, okay? I ask everybody these same questions. So the first one is a fun one. So, John, if your mental health had a song, what would you say that song would be?
My God. Oh, I hate these questions because they're, oh my God, I don't know.
There's no wrong answer.
Somebody,
Whatever the first
somebody,
question
well,
answer.
I feel I want to be profound. Somebody asked me in a similar podcast, what's your karaoke go-to song? And I think that fits in this
Yeah,
one.
okay.
You've Got a Friend. James Taylor, You've Got a
Yeah.
Friend.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I like that. Yeah. That's
Thank
good
you.
though, because it's a fun question because you get people that answer and you get the funniest responses ever to it. And people are just like, oh man, that's a great question. I'm like, it is because music and mental health go hand in hand a lot of times.
Really does.
And
It
I'm a
really
big
does.
music person too, and so I love music in general. It's like, and when someone asked me, I broke mine down. I had like 3 different songs to break down the whole conversation though. And it was just like, so it was interesting though, because I like hearing people's thoughts and I invite artists to come on too and you ask their question to them and they come up with some interesting answers too. So it's really funny to see. So, all right, John, we're at the most important question of this interview. Okay. You ready? This pressure's on. This is for the $1 million, man. Okay. If you could break the stigma about mental health, what would you say that would be? Like now, when I ask you this question, I mean something that you see people on a daily basis just say that you want them to stop believing. What would you say that would be?
I would say stop believing all the shit you tell yourself about yourself. You are of much more value than you think you are. Are you better than are you perfect? No. Are there people who are better at doing what they do than you are? Sure. Are you better at able to do some things than other people? Yeah. But you're not as bad as you think you are. You don't suck as badly as you think you do. Give yourself some credit. You have, and for any deficiencies that you've got, get better. Learn, become a better person, become a better writer, take classes, do what you can to improve yourself. But, don't take yourself out of the equation prematurely because, you have a lot more going for you than you think you do.
I love it. Thank you so much, John, for being here today. John, before we wrap up, did you want to go ahead and plug your website where everybody can find you so they can check out your books and everything else you've done, all that kind of great stuff?
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate that, Pete. My website is where you can go to find out about the motivational speaking I do, the manuscript editing I do, the one-on-one coaching I do, the books that I've written. It's johndedakis.com. That's JOHN, D as in dog E, D as in dog A, KIS as in Sam.com, johndedakis.com.
Well, John, thank you so much again for being here, man. I absolutely loved it. I enjoyed having you today. I enjoyed this conversation, and I appreciate what you're doing, man. And I'll definitely have to check out some of your books and things like that too, because I'm always looking for new things to check out. But thank you so much for hanging out, man. This is great. It was an honor to have you here. Like I said, the minute when you reached out and said Wolf Blitzer, I was like, oh my God, I've got to talk to him for sure.
Thank you, Pete. This has been a joy.
Thank you so much, John. I appreciate that. Guys, and with that being said, we're going to wrap up this episode of Pete vs. Anxiety, guys. I'm Pete vs. Anxiety on X all the way down to TikTok. I'm on Spotify all the way down to Pandora Radio. And as I always say, it costs nothing to be kind to somebody. One kind act you can do can save someone's life, or hell, you can make their day. I'm Pete vs. Anxiety signing off saying, don't ask how your day is today. Say, hey, how's your mental health today?
So bad, everything fall, you're breaking my neck. It's a sign of respect, it's a nice for death, but never dive the price of checks. I got my integrity and my word. I'd rather die.